Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I'm a little chilly.
You are a little chilly. That looks like a high alpine lake, although probably in the Rockies, is it?
Yes, I guess it would. No, no, this is Bow Lake in Alberta.
That is Rockies.
It is the Rock. I was wondering if the Rockies technically
Yes.
make it up
Yeah.
that far.
Yes, they do. Canadian Rockies.
They're beautiful, isn't it?
Beautiful territory. Yes.
Yes, early spring in the Rockies. You can see a little bit
Early
of the
spring.
grass coming out
And
of
you
the
can see
trees.
what look like some birders over on the side of the picture over there by the trees.
Yes, you sure can. Look at that. Yeah, it's a pretty clear picture.
Yes, it is.
Pretty amazing. And you can see the snow melt. It's very, very interesting. Beautiful country. We are going to going to be unraveling a CEO level problem. All of this in service of our doing podcasts to show how CEOs can use this in their day-to-day work, their individual contribution. Two reasons. One, it's incredibly powerful. But what we'll demonstrate more and more as we do this is the strong need to have three things: the knowledge, experience, and judgment of high level people, and meaning C-level kinds of individuals that can take the output from these models and truly make them valuable.
What we're really talking about today, Tom, is the human-machine partnership that we've talked about a lot. And I know you're going to demonstrate the machine part of it, and then we'll be talking about how necessary the human part is to really get something that a CEO can work with. And
I
with
have been accused of having little human and too much machine, Deirdre. So,
well,
I'm
I
glad
will
you're adding the human
look,
element to this discussion.
I will argue for the human in all of this.
Yes, you
Even
will.
so, the machine is very powerful, as you're just about to
It
demonstrate.
really is. And one of the things that we'll talk about and we'll show is how quickly it can overwhelm you with material
Yes.
and even fool you a bit. And we'll do a little bit of demonstration of that. We'll also, as we proceed, the next video we do in this series, it probably will not be our next video because our next video is going to be on something else. But this video series will continue and we'll actually go into our tips for using this in the C-suite, our recommendations for best practices, and how to add that in your way of describing it, to add the human element to the human machine partnership,
Correct. Yes.
which is really, really important. So we'll have three sections here, Dieter. We're going to start with how do we start using, in this case, we'll start in Grok. We'll move over to Claude, mostly because we are using Grok for the research side, the deep search capability and the deep think capability that it has. And then we'll move to Claude once we create the data that we're going to use from the research. We'll move it over to Claude because Claude, at least for us, gives excellent does an excellent job with what you and I call synthesizing data. So taking good, clean research data and synthesizing it into meaningful things when you prompt it in appropriate ways. Um, so we'll be doing that. Then we'll be showing you near the end how do you use this material and how do you conclude things from using it. And we'll then, as I said, later on, we'll cover another time in another video, we'll cover the actual practices we use to do that. So, though some of them will be obvious as we go through this. So with that, anything to add, Deirdre, before I fire up Grok here?
Nothing more at the beginning, so why don't you go ahead?
So as always with this, um, choose the models that work for you. So the most important thing is to choose a model you're comfortable with and to understand the difference between an LLM capability and a reasoning model capability. And we have done touched on that in our other models, our other videos on these in this series. So we won't go into a lot of the description of that today, but you'll see that for us, at least for the work that I do, I like Grok for research. And for the most part, which by the research, I mean deep research using deep search, which is a reasoning model um, AI. And we'll show what the difference is, how it shows up when you use it. Then we'll move to Claude. And in Claude, that's a heavy, it does have a little bit of reasoning capability, but its real strength is in synthesizing, and that's where we're using Claude. And you'll actually see how that shows up in the interface as it does its work. So with that, we are going to do this, Deirdre. We're going to start out by starting a new chat here. And what we're going to do here is, since the version that we have right now, which is the production version of Grok, which is Model 3, which is their smartest of all, and we have the search capability enabled here, so it's not just reasoning, but it also has search. Our model has deep search, and it also has deeper search, which extends the capability. And then we have the think module, which takes it even further in how it does. Now, I'll tell you, there is a huge difference between deep search and extended search or deeper search.
Yes.
Running some of these models, Deirdre, and this particular one we did today, or I have done in previous days, and we're going to repeat a little bit. I'm going to leave it on deep search. I'm not going to engage the deeper. The difference in the amount of time, this generally takes 5 minutes or in that range. This, the deeper search, took over 15 minutes
Mhm.
of compute time. Can you imagine what the human equivalent of that is?
Which is a lot more than anyone would expect, actually.
It is where you'd really, the way you'd use that is if you're looking for every bit of data that you can conceivably find in the internet sphere that this has capability to reach. So it just literally reaches as far as it can, looking for data that's relevant. And also, as we've talked about in some of the other videos on this, it cross-checks and it asks itself, does this look reasonable, right? Am I coming up with the same similar data, or is it too weak still? And I need to still work and see if I can improve the confidence that I have as a model in that data. So that's where you get into deeper search. Um, Not recommended unless you have a reason for doing it, meaning you really need to look for the most current data up to the minute on this type of thing, and it's a bit obscure. So with that, I'm going to start because what we really want to do here, and I'm as Deirdre, I know you know, I actually keep a record of my prompts. So I'm taking the prompts I used. We actually think that's one of the best practices. I'm taking prompts I used from the last time I ran this. So far, I've run this 4 times. This will be the 5th time I've run it. This is the exact prompt I asked the first time. I said, morning. And I said, I would like to analyze US government spending. How can we work together on this? Now, I am going to actually call this version 5 because, as I said, this is exactly the question I asked at another time. It's probably going to say, if I did it the other way, it's probably going to come back and say, well, how would you like to change the one we did last, right? And I just want to call it this. It may still do that. We'll see what it does. All right. Here's the first tip. You don't always have to answer everything it asks you. Now, I might say that I've looked at this before and this is for my own records, because it's trying to figure out, am I telling it something meaningful? I'm not. You have two things you can do. One, you can just ignore, and we'll tell you about that later, that is a good method. Talks about defining the scope, the data sources, where it can pull things from, which is where it has pulled it in the past, where we expect, which are the standard sources, how it will do it, trends over time, per capita, and not bad. Okay, please share more details with version 5 and your preference. Okay, so any thoughts on this, Deirdre, before we go?
No, you please go ahead.
Okay. So this is what I asked it the last time, and I'm going to start out. I'm going to add to this on the version 5 thing, and I didn't mean to hit enter without explaining the rest. Now you see what it's doing. It's creating a data sheet for me. And notice this being primarily an LLM, it's giving me verbal and numbers. Now
Mhm.
I can actually tell it to give me numbers, and it will then give me a script that I can then run and create a numbers chart from, but I'll stay away from that at this point. You can see that it's still working on this because the logo is spinning. So it means this is not done yet. Then it always comes back and says, hey, you didn't answer version 5, so if you have additional context, please tell me. So I'm going to just say right here, sorry. And by the way, as we've said before, why do I make this personal? I do it because for two reasons. Mostly because I am a Southerner and I'm a polite Southerner. And so even a machine, everybody is a person first instead of a machine, except machines. But I even like to treat machines sometimes as people do, as I know you know. In this case, I actually really am doing this for my own benefit, that when I go back and look at the building of the material, I know what I was doing, right? So it's not just some random prompt. I know that I'm closing something out or I'm launching something or I wasn't clear about something. And it helps me later when I'm documenting what was my contribution in setting this. We'll actually show you how this is really important when it gets to the end and you've got something that's very confusing. And you figure out, was that because the machine took it there or did I take it there by how I directed the machine? And I'm going
Right.
to say the version.
And and just a quick comment to our listeners that you're talking about the human part now, the human input that allows the machine to do its work.
Yes. So I'm just going to say that right there so that it doesn't get caught up in that. And it'll come back and give me some nice answer. Okay. So notice how it came back and said, avoiding any reference to version 5, streamlining it for your records. So it created this document again. And I'm assuming if I go back to the other one, I'll find version 5 in here somewhere. I'm not going to waste our time doing that. But obviously, if it went back and redid the document, or what this would call an artifact, there was a reason why it did it. Now, this is interesting, and so okay, it's good. And I'm sure there's a lot of information here that's helpful. I would just tell you, having done this now a few times, I don't think it's worth going through this yet. We need to figure out what is this telling us. Um, and we'll see how what's happening here is you'll see that just I happen to know this is why I'm telling you this. This is federal government expenditures. This is including $3.4 trillion of state and local. Now, you wouldn't know that from this. I happen to know it because I did, I had to unravel it earlier. That's why I say it's not quite worth spending a lot of time on this, except looking and seeing and say, okay, I get this, but I think I want to keep going. Now, why didn't I, well, let me, before I ask myself that question, I'm going to say, um, let's do this because I want to see, and I want to change this. Let's do deep search and let's leave off think because notice that it actually was 18 minutes. I kept a record of it. Kept a record of it. All right. I'm going to change the prompt to deep search. So let me just, I have to rewrite this, Deirdre. I'm sorry about that. I did this for a reason. Here we go. Yes, there we go. Sometimes it's easier to write them on your actual prompt sheet and then copy and paste them so that you don't make the mistake I made the first one. I meant to answer the version question right up front, and instead of hitting the shift and key to be able to let me when I hit return go down, it actually launched the prompt when I hit return. Okay, so now deep search, and it's going to do this now. Okay. So notice how it's taking time to do this. What it didn't do because we asked it to do this for us, notice it's taking longer than it did the last time to
Yes.
unfold. What it didn't do is show us how it's doing it and the explainability part. Okay. Analysis refines the previous response with updated web data, critically assessing sources reliability, so forth. Focus on any specific. Okay. What I'm going to do is, and by the way, this prompt here, ask it, that means go using the deeper search. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to turn on deep search. I've got there and now notice how instead of saying this, which says I'm in Grok 3, when I turn this, it goes to deep search. Then I can actually, instead of deep search, I could select deeper. I'm not going to for the reasons we talked about. But I'm now going to say, can we please run this again? Now, why am I doing that? So I can see the process. Okay. Now, it will show me the explainability part, Deirdre, because I have put it in deep search mode. I'm no longer in strictly the LLM. And what that'll do is it changes how it operates. When I operate with a reasoning model, it does not answer me in niceties. So you won't see it say, "Oh, no worries, don't," or I say, "Thank you for doing that." You won't get any kind of feedback, or at least in the versions I've worked with up until today. I mean, Musk and his team are constantly changing this thing, so it might do it today, but at least it didn't the last time. And that was just a reflection of how the model functions. So let's see what goes on here. Now, notice this window is called thinking, and it's explaining this piece here. And you can watch where it's going and it's browsing results. It's analyzing the spending data. And it will actually tell you what it's doing when it says, okay, if this is this, right, which fits the historic data. Now it says clarifying economic terms, BEA, SAR, making sure the terminology is clear. So says Fred from the St. Louis Fed uh, is giving him that data. It's browsing for BEA data. It's continuing to clarify the economic terms. And you see how it says things like this. It doesn't provide exact dollar amounts, so I'm looking at for other sources. So this is what the point behind this is the what we call explainability. It's explaining what it's doing. It found 10 results and it's going to grab that data. It looks like the other 5 are in a different menu. Now it's evaluating everything. But notice at this point, we're already almost 2 minutes in. And notice that's a lot longer than just not showing the explainability piece. But by showing the explainability piece, we're actually slowing it down a bit. But I always do this so I can see how deep the thinking is going. So now it's reviewing everything. And we're now at 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
It's amazing how long that feels. Even, we've gotten spoiled with some of these fast searches, I think.
We really
But
have.
this is an amazing amount of material and work for 3 minutes.
It really is. Now you see it's calculating a few things. So we're now at 3 minutes and 20, almost 30 seconds. It's looking at historic data and doing comparisons. It's researching historic spending. Must not have had quite enough to do the comparison properly.
Right, but I was about to comment that it almost looks as if it's going beyond your question to
Mhm.
answer the question as it has been trained to answer such questions.
Yeah, it is always going to try to be as complete as it can, Deirdre, which
Mhm.
can be a problem for people, especially C-suite people, where it may take it way beyond it where it should, because it
And I
may be
think that becomes part of what we talk about when we talk about the human aspect to the whole thing in a few minutes.
yes, because sometimes in its completeness, it heads it in the wrong direction, or heads it in a confusing direction, or an ill-judged direction. Now
Or
notice how it's adjusting.
it makes decisions that we would not make if we were doing the same work. And anticipating some of our questions, we have to be aware of the decisions it is making when it's generating
Exactly
that
right.
information.
It's exactly right. And you'll see that in the method we're using, I'm going from large to small. I'm just letting it give me data and then I'm narrowing that data till I get exactly what I want. Now, why don't I do that from the beginning? Because we've proven before, if you layer too many layers of analysis in it at one time, you slow the model down and it the whole total, I mean, it actually, in prior cases, some of you that have been with us, you've seen in some of our other work, we deliberately had the model crash on us or just terminate what it was doing and just give us a partial result. If you're not careful, and in one case it was not that obvious, you really had to look for the prompt, you might have not seen that it stopped early in its search. So you may have an incomplete, say, data set. So it's really important to watch what's going on. That's why I prefer to do it in a window where I can see explainability. And most of the reasoning models that exist do this now. I think ChatGPT does this in a form. It's not quite as comprehensive as this is, but I prefer this to ChatGPT because of training more than anything else. And then also data sharing is not as clear, meaning not sharing data that I've done, right, is not as clear to me. And then also I do work where I have to use Claude for security and for focus on uh, minimal hallucination is probably the best way to say it.
Right. Mhm.
So notice how we're now at 6.5 minutes and it's still going, Deirdre.
It's still going, but compared to the 15 minutes of the deeper search, we're actually getting a lot of information for the shorter period of time.
Yes, and when I ran the comparison, um, I found that there was very little difference between the two. All right, so it's now finished there. So that was 7 minutes worth versus the 18 actually was what it was, Deirdre. So we're at about half by using deep search rather than deeper. Okay. And it will come back and it will then adjust everything for me. Um, and if I went back and compared this to the one it did earlier without explainability, I don't know whether we'd really have improved it much by taking the longer time other than understanding it. I'm not going to spend our time today doing that, but I would normally at this point ask, would you please compare the last two runs we did with this and tell me what were the changes material? Tell me what they were and were they material? I also frequently ask for confidence intervals on data accuracy and projection. I'm not going to do that right now because, again, we're getting pretty deep here. But notice how it's giving me all this. This is where it got it from. Now, notice this time it gave me this. It didn't give me this in the last document. So when I asked it to do pure deep research where I was going, or deep search, where I used that model with very little of the LLM, um, it, it gave me it gave me a lot more information here. Now, notice that what it did give me a summary of what it did. So
Yes.
over here, it gave me just a very straightforward summary of what it did. And then notice the one thing it didn't do was have any conversation with me. Where in prior, when I was not in this deep search, if I go back up here, and I'm going to click out of this window, when I go back up here, notice how when it was doing this, it was actually having a conversation with me. So I'm going to get back up here. Okay. So this, for all of this, I was in just the LLM. And then notice how it's ended by saying, or integrate this into your record keeping. Please let me know how you'd like to proceed because it knows that record keeping is important to me because that's why I named it version 5. So there you're seeing the aspect of the more of the LLM involved to show the human interaction. But notice how to start out here where it said, can we please run this again? Notice how it didn't say anything to me. It just started doing it. And then once we ran through this, it's created this document, but then it stopped. Now, what does this mean? This means it'll show the side by side, inline window that gives me the detail for all this. And that's down here. And I'm probably confusing the daylights out of here, Deirdre, but this is it ran me to the top, unfortunately. But when I hit that inline thing here for this 6 minutes and 48 seconds worth of work in the 55 sources, here's the window it was running a running total on.
Mhm.
And you'll
Right.
recognize these are all, by the way, these are all hyperlinks. You can hyperlink out of here to all these sources.
Mhm.
And then you can go to the various sections to see what it's done.
Right. And for those people just listening, what Tom is showing is the different formatting when you click on different aspects of the results from the.
So what you're seeing here is an enormous amount of information, right, that it's given me to the point where it really could end up being daunting. Where to do this justice, if we didn't know better, you'd end up spending a lot of time trying to dig through this, Deirdre, to say, wait a minute, what did I just get? Right? Now, here's what I recommend. And again, this gives me now key citations and I mean, just a bunch of stuff. Again, if I hit this button here, it's going to open up again one layer deeper and give me even more explainability. Wonderful stuff. I'm going to turn off this deep search capability. And the way I do that is I just click that button and you see it moves from the left to the right. And that tells me I'm now in Grok 3 without the deep search capability. Um, so what you can now do, um, let me just see what I did the last time when I got to this. Oh yeah, that's the comparison. Okay. So let's see what it does here. Because when I dug through this, I found that it gave me too many categories of spending, Deirdre, and didn't prioritize the categories of spending. And so what I'm asking it to do now is, can we go deeper in the analysis by analyzing the most important categories of spending? One of the things will tell you when we get into best practices in a future video, I find that you guide the model much like you fly an airplane or you drive a car in most circumstances. You make minor adjustments. You make minor adjustments to the steering wheel, you make minor adjustments to the accelerator. Now, that's unless you're out having fun. That's a different issue. But to do it well, you make minor adjustments. I think you have to treat these models in the same way. You're making small adjustments, minor adjustments. You don't feed it a lot of input. You don't turn the car wheel and accelerate at the same time or slam on the brakes unless you're trying to avoid something. But for normal driving, you don't put large inputs in multiple places. Think of these models the same way. It's a very powerful tool. So it's best to be nudged in small pieces. So I'm going to build up to getting the most important elements, and then I want to take it further. So let's see what it does.
You're looking for the analysis of the most important categories of spending here.
Yes, exactly. And now it's going to come back and tell us kind of what we wanted it to say, right? And you can see what it's saying here, Deirdre. It's all right, let's talk about mandatory spending first.
Right.
Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. I believe those are entitlement spending, right, Deirdre?
Yes.
And then you've got discretionary, which is defense and non-defense. And then you have interest payments, which all this stuff will come up later as we get deeper. And now it's giving me some of the data. And notice how, for those of you that are listening and aren't watching, it's giving me some comparative data, 24 versus 25 for the first quarter and telling me the difference. But I kind of want to know how much progress are we making to reduce spending. And that's more of an ongoing thing, not a year-to-year comparison as much because of the factors. Now, we happen to know that because we've done the analysis here. But it goes in and it says, what's driving all this stuff? Cost of living increases, aging population, trust funds, um, economic impact, Medicare gets into that, Medicaid. It starts taking apart these pieces and it gives you interesting information. I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet, Deirdre, and that's the problem with this. It will always give you more than you want at the moment. or almost always give you more than you want at the moment. I think the important thing is, as all good C-level people are, keep your eye on the ball, right? What do you want the outcome to be? And how do
Mhm.
you not get lost in the details? How do you stay focused on what you want? Now it's
Yeah.
talking about economic and policy numbers. Okay, I'm starting to get major category data. Those are billions of dollars recommended for further analysis. Okay. Now, I'm not going to pay a lot of attention to this. I know this sounds terrible, but remember, I'm unpeeling the layers of the onion here. And I kind of know I still want to go deeper, and I'm not quite where I need to be yet. So, where do I want to go? I think at this point, what I'd like to do, I think I've got the data. And it's kind of given me a fair amount of analysis. Now, remember, we're going to turn this over to a really good synthesizing tool, Claude, and let it try to make some sense of this for us. So I'm not trying to tell it to make sense. I'm just trying to pull out the right data. So we have a saying around our part, what am I missing? Right? So I say, can we go deeper? Oh, sorry, it didn't copy my prompt when I said that. Sorry about this. Let me
Yeah. Well, this is something you and I talk about in many places, Tom, that whenever you get data, you need to do the analysis. In fact, the analysis is more important than the data itself, which is something
absolutely.
people tend to forget when dealing with any sort of output from any sort of tool like this.
Yes. And it's only when you've been able to not only to be able to analyze it and then verify the data,
Right.
and verify the data is good. But here you see, is there anything I've missed in trying to better understand government spending and the progress we've made since the Doge work began in late January 2025? So what I'm doing here is, instead of me trying to make a judgment of how much I've missed or what I might have missed, I'm asking it to tell me. And these are tricks you can put in at the right point to try to better elucidate for you how far you've come or what are you missing. And I kind of know what I'm missing, but I wanted to do this in a way that would stop and let it tell me. And this usually is a fascinating part of this. And it comes in, and what it says is, you know, okay, it says it's a good time to ask this question. Well, it would say that anyway. It just wants to make me feel good. Um, and it says, okay, you've already covered some of this stuff. However, there's some other things we may not have gotten to yet. Okay. Then it says revenue spending mismatch. Now, I didn't ask about revenue. I deliberately didn't ask about revenue, right? Because you and I are trying to take apart the pieces to better understand the pieces, because we know this whole subject is very complicated, and you could get lost in the interaction between revenue and spending changes. We just wanted to spend on change, but it's fine. And then long-term projections. Well, we deliberately didn't get into long-term because we wanted to say, let's look at the exact number and what are we doing there? Mainly because the long-term stuff and the models that government uses for that are really restricted, and they don't allow for factors of growth. Data quality and transparency. Okay, there we go. Um, Not bad. Economic feedback loops. Yep. And then political and legal constraints. Aha, here we go. The analysis hasn't fully addressed barriers to Doge, and we know this from other economic work we've done using this economic forecasting and congressional restraints and legal challenges. So this is good. This is getting at, okay, trying to make it more real for me. Why it matters. Political gridlock, legal hurdles. Okay. Now it gets into the progress of Doge, and it's going to keep using the 55 billion mark, the 32 billion mark. There's a 2 billion in here that'll come up. There's the 2 trillion goal, Deirdre. And as I said, it went from 1 trillion to 2 trillion. I don't know
Right.
how you can get 2 trillion out of this, but I can see maybe a trillion, but even a trillion, Deirdre, from the work we've done says that's a very large
It,
chunk.
it's very important.
Workforce reductions, structural changes. By the way, I suggest that you do this for yourself just so that you begin to understand this work like Deirdre and I have done. This is huge. It gives you a very different view of the seriousness of this because you find the this equation is not going to close unless we take serious spending actions, and that we need the revenue changes that are occurring, and we need the growth that's occurring, and we need the confidence to come back in the American economy. That together, we can affect the 1 trillion by not only reducing interest rates that are demanded based on improving view of the United States' strength and capabilities to sustain economically, but also um, it will reduce the actual amount of the interest paid from a total absolute point. And then you reduce the deficit, which then would drive less demands for the actual borrowing money in the first place. So then it gets into this. It's spending overview, missed dimensions, the revenue. Yep, we knew about that. The long-term structural drivers. Yep. Data quality. Yep. And what this is telling you is that it just doesn't have all the data yet because we still don't even have some agencies that reported 2022 data. Well, that's interesting, isn't it, Duty?
It is, but I think we've heard about that. And that's one of the human things that we bring to this analysis. We've heard about that sort of thing.
Absolutely. We expected it because we know that. And that's the problem. And if you really wanted to understand this, you'd go in and say, okay, please, let's do an analysis on what we're missing and how good is that data and how material is it for what we're doing. But we do that at the end when we know where we're going. Okay, claim savings. Look, to me, this is great. I don't want to dig through this yet because I want to see how it matches against everything else. But it says, here's the Doge impact, which we've been through this before. The big impact is here, but you can see it's not taking into account this, mostly because this has not been solidified, meaning when they've tried to reduce the population of people that are getting this that shouldn't be getting it, they haven't been able to make those actions yet, and they're likely to face court challenges along that
Okay.
way.
For those people listening, the data show the largest decreases in defense spending, although that's a point I'll come back to in a little bit. And Tom was just talking about Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, the entitlements, which are not showing any Doge impact right now.
Yes, and it's not about actually cutting it's not about cutting the payments to individuals. It's about making sure the only people that are getting payments deserve them, and not means testing here. It's more, are they citizens? Have they been getting these programs when they shouldn't? There are, I don't, I'm not working on any of that data, so I don't know if the Social Security claims there are many people that are dead that are getting these payments, right? So it's not about cutting people that should get these or cutting their payments on any of the three: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. It's about just eliminating fraud and waste. And again, the one thing we'd see in here is if they're successful with the prescription drug work, that'll have a major effect on Medicare and Medicaid spending,
Correct.
because pharmaceuticals are a big piece of that. And you can bet your money that it will also hit other aspects of healthcare that they're not done there yet either. But anyway, so again, and this actually shows no changes to interest payments, um, that Doge has not been able to affect any change in interest payments. Um, and again, there are factors that go into what makes those payments what they are. So, right now, the effect, and you've heard me say this before earlier, it's about $2 billion to maybe $3 billion of real, actually current levels of spending reduction that you can attribute to Doge, even though they've identified in the hundreds of billions. So now it tells me what it'd like me to do. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop. And what I did was to take and cut and paste a lot of this information into Claude so that we can have Claude do the synthesis work. And I'll show you how that what I did there. So I'm going to move to Claude. Now, okay, this is how it greeted me just a minute ago on this particular computer because I used it earlier doing something else. And I'm using Sonnet 3.7, which is their top model that has some reasoning in it and has a very strong LLM. Uh, and then the Haiku model is used for other things. But for our purposes right now, Sonnet is the best. It's a very, very solid synthesis of data. Used a lot in the professional programming world for doing programming. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to name it something very similar to what we did in the other um, in the Grok model. So I'm going to say, let me get to my Claude prompts here. And I'm going to be a little more specific with Claude on this because I'm going to give it data. Now, what I want to do is I'm not going to do it here. But if I were starting out, I would just start out here if I wanted to do one long thing. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go back into a capability we talked about the last time, they're called projects. And we can look at the projects I have going on here. And notice I've done two, and I've already done a version of this in the past, and now this is the second version I was working on, and I've done also another version that I've deleted, and so I've got to what I'm calling version 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this project, and this is where I was, well, an hour ago, right? Understanding government spending progress. If I go in here, it will do what we're going to do now, and it's already been done. Okay, now, when I do that, I can go back into there, but what I've done is I've created a database, and this is the database of material that came out of Grok. So here, if you were to spend time, you'll notice this looks very much like in text form what we got out of Grok. I'm giving it to Claude as uh, primary research information. So it'll come here first, and it's called knowledge, project knowledge. And you input it by doing this and then adding text. And then you add text, and you can do it from Word and or whatever else, and it will translate it into pure text like it just did. And each one of these is one of the aspects that I got out of Claude from the work we just, excuse me, out of Grok from the work we just did. I did put something else in here, and it's about deep business. So I put this in here, which is what our mission is, what tech builders are, our podcasts, what we do, what our vision is, that we're not political, we don't take a side, we're here to build things. That talks about me and Deirdre, and it has our bio, summaries of our bios, and talks about that we use YouTube and all this sort of thing. Now, why did I do that? Mainly because then it has some reference about who we are while we're doing this. Now, it's not going to apply so much to the work we're doing at the moment, but I always put that in there as a piece of knowledge because I may end up wanting it to do something specific for us. In others, I've put both of our detailed bios in. I've also put replicas of our books in there for it to have. So it had the way we think about certain topics. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to paste um, that phrase. I'm trying to make sense of the following, um, which is this. And I'm going to call this um, understanding the spending problem. And I'm going to call it version 5. So I'm in sync with um, I'm in sync with Grok. I'm going to just do this time. So it doesn't look like I'm making it into something specific. Okay. And this is understanding. Let me just make sure I've got the full title up here. I don't. Okay. Now I'm doing this because it's sitting, otherwise it might say, well, we've already done this one. And by the way, it may say that. Let's see what it says. Okay. And remember, I asked, how can we work together on this? So it actually didn't go back and grab the other one because I did that differently, but it is going to end up using this same information here. So it's just doing it here, excuse me, here. Um, and, it actually went through and told me and did some summary here. So let's see what it's saying. I'll help you make sense of this. Let me start by summarizing what I understand from the documents you provided. Okay, that's helpful, right? Because we didn't have to ask for it. Spending reached 7.2 billion, broken into three categories: mandatory, discretionary, and interest payments. Key structural issues: growing deficit, national debt, mandatory spending, and interest payments. Not bad. It talks about Doge. It talks about the claimed savings of 160 billion, and talks about the details of that total. And then it gets into verified impact, which is good, and what we might be missing. So not bad, not bad at all. So let's just do this. So what I really think might help is if we narrow this down a bit. So let's do that. Thank you for this. Let's narrow down our start. Can I keep our focus on spending side of the equation? Let's limit our time period to the first 6 months of 25. Could you give me recommendations for next steps in explaining and understanding this subject in priority order? And how much can you help me with of each one? Okay. So notice how now I've given it a lot of information. So it's not going to have to go out and search for a lot. It is going to look and say, well, wait a minute, you were missing some of this stuff, but if only after it narrows it down here. Okay. So it knows I want to stay away from there. I want to stay at 6 months. Next steps. Okay. Break down the spending categories in more detail. Exactly. I would like to do this, but for the sense of time, we won't. We'll probably do something like that later, because then we'd get into confidence intervals of the data. Not bad. Not bad recommendations, Deirdre.
No, not bad at all.
Pretty good. Now, could I have gotten this from Grok? Maybe, but I'm going to get them better from this. At least I think you get better from Claude, the best from Claude. By the way, it's always subject dependent too, because remember, most of them learn from other people doing these things. Okay, break down spending categories, which is where I wanted to be in the first place, and then analyzing Doge would be number two. So not surprisingly, I'm going to say, can we start with recommendation one? And let's just see what it says. I'll create a detailed breakdown. Okay. Now, what it did is it's giving me major categories and telling me it's about 66% of the budget. And it's giving it to me and telling me how much the monthly spending is and how much the growth rate is and the key factor. I mean, this is all good stuff. But again, just even with narrowing the focus down to this, you end up with a huge amount of data here and a huge amount of information. And it talks about the key spending trends, the key spending insights, diverging trends, Doge impact limitations, interest burden, spending versus GDP, and structural barriers. Okay. Now, what I'm going to ask it to do is to do this. Now, anytime you get to this level, you're not quite at the point. What I, no, let me say it differently. At some point, it's helpful to do this next few steps. And Deirdre, I promise you we'll stop after this. I promise. But notice what I've done here is when I'm down here, I'm going to say, would you be able to summarize this into a plain text document, organized in a way I can then cut and paste into PowerPoint charts for a presentation dealing with this topic? Now, why would I ask for that at this point? Because it's now going to tell me exactly what it thinks are important here and how I should unfold them in the way I understand them. Now, why would I do that? Because it's going to take this massive amount of data and start analyzing it for me and show me something that Deirdre really wants us to always focus on. Is what we're seeing believable and valid? Also, is it explainable? Right? Because what we get may not be explainable, meaning we couldn't throw it up on the wall and talk to an audience about it. And I still contend that we're not there, but only because you and I did try to do it with each other about earlier today. But let's try this and see this. Now, why did I
Right.
ask for a plain text document? Because otherwise, what it's going to do, it's going to give me an HTML type program that will be run in another place and create the document for me. I don't want it to do anything fancy. I just want it to give me the stuff. Okay. So I've created a plain text document formatted for easy copying into PowerPoint, organized in clear sections. Key feature of the document, data is presented in simple tables, columns, easy copying. And, that's not bad. I mean, this actually is really nice. And this is done better, Deirdre, than the version that I did the last time where it didn't actually do it this way, right?
It put in tables, which make it easier to use.
But what was interesting was the prompts were identical,
Well,
right?
it keeps getting more experience. It keeps practicing and figuring out how it can make the data more useful to you.
So if I like this, which I do, I will go back and learn from this and figure out what it's saying here and how I could have rewritten the prompt to get that, right?
Right.
Because I like this, because I can do this, and I can even do a screen shot and put it on if I wanted. But now it's getting into the amounts of spending. Now notice Deirdre did a better job this time of actually giving me comparable data without a lot of confusing formatting.
To some degree, we probably won't really get into the human part of this. Maybe that's in our next video on this topic. But there are some issues in relation to interpretation of this data. For example, some of the numbers are in trillions of dollars, some are in billions of dollars, and the human has to be alert to see this. Just a simple reading of the data here. And then there are all of the analysis issues, which I won't start going into right now. Next time.
Yes. But you can see what Deirdre's talking about, where it switches here from billions to there into trillions, and it can get very confusing. The other thing is total federal spending, and then mandatory discretionary, and then interest. Notice this adds to 99%, but this is 15. Now, notice how Deirdre, this time it did say interest overlaps with other categories, but that's pretty hard to understand. Where is this, right? I mean,
It,
it's
it,
good.
it,
I'm glad I know that because you and I know that 1.1 trillion number. And
but
we
it's
know
very
that's the
hard to
annual
understand.
number, right?
Because that's payment of the debt interest and so forth. And that would be something you would want broken out in some sort of analysis like this. But again, these are human questions that the human brings to the data that the machine spits out for
Yeah,
us.
you and I would never write this chart this way.
Right.
And I can, like we said, we can understand why it did highlight interest because it's a key area both for the equation to work and also for Doge. But then it talks about the growth rates, and we know this, but it's done a nice job. But it's still not something I think I could take and explain to anybody. because it still doesn't unfold this thing quite the way I would like to unfold it. It's talking about the right subjects.
It,
Um,
it is, but I've got to keep dropping in some of these human aspects, Tom. I can't help myself. That one thing you and I have seen is some people in the media will do this sort of analysis and then pick up one of these pieces of information and drop it unanalyzed into a media report. And
Absolutely.
that's where this becomes a little misleading. That yes, they got a number from an analysis from one of these LLMs. Remember, this is an LLM, but they didn't bring the human knowledge, the human sense of context, and the understanding of what that number really represents to their reporting. And that makes the reporting questionable. I'll use the word questionable.
Yes. So let's do this. So I like to do this at the end where I say, all right, so just I'm at this point, I kind of understand that it's headed in the right direction. So it isn't off balance terribly. And because it's talking about the right things, it just is describing them in a way that I can't really explain very well to people, mostly because I've done enough of this now, I know how I would explain it. But let's say what might really help next is to pull all this together into a white paper-like document. Could you do that for all this work, including an exec summary and a reference section? Now, what we'll use that for is that will help us then be able to read a story. Right now, it's taking and creating a story or a narrative about this data. So we've got the data, we've got the way it's telling us it would display it in summary form. Now we're going to get a document that we can read. And this is your test, Deirdre. If you can get, first of all, if you can't pass the PowerPoint test, that tells you right there it's not gonna, the writing is not gonna help. But this is where you usually would turn and say, this is not good enough.
Correct. And I can anticipate that I would say this about this because it's missing the human aspect to the whole thing. That we know there are all sorts of issues that you and I have talked about in some of our previous videos and we'll talk about next time. But meanwhile, what it is doing is it's assuming that everything that it has generated based on the data used in its training allows it to create an accurate document. And again, we know that this needs to be looked at as the starting point, not the end point for an analysis of this topic.
Yes, and we talk about this human-machine partnership, which means that the machine can do incredible things, and you've seen it do incredible things already that would take a lot of time for humans to do this, even a lot of humans to do this. What it, but again, it's that inexperienced, the not completely knowledgeable, and also in some ways not the nuanced judgment that someone with experience and knowledge can bring to this. And that's what needs to happen. And you're reached the point now where you've said, you know what, I've got enough data here. Let's try to sort out how might we do this. And this is where you and I spent, what, an hour this morning, Deirdre, going
Correct.
through what at this point, okay, we looked at everything and we actually did come out with some answers, but we'll cover those in a future video. But it took us an hour of back and forth of you and me. This would be two people in the C-suite, or the CEO and their COO, or their chief strategy officer, or their CTO, or their head of marketing, to sit down and really talk this through and try to figure out what is this telling us. But with this, you've done work that you really just haven't been able to do in the past. And that's what we hear people that have been using this at a high level. That's what they say, is that I've done work here that I've never been able to do before because it's not in my capacity to do it. I don't have the resources or the money, meaning human resources or the money to time this. And in even the time, because even if you paid BCG or McKinsey or somebody to do this work, it would still take time.
Mhm.
It takes not only money, but time. And then you've got still got the issue of context, judgment. You expect to pay them for context, knowledge, and judgment, but you're the ultimate judgment, Deirdre, as CEO. You're the ultimate judge person judging this thing. Um,
Correct. And I think I mentioned this morning when we were going through this, what worries me about the creation of documents like this, and it's a beautiful document, well organized, it looks very official, is that people may accept it as final without the addition of the human analysis, setting of the context, bringing of the judgment, and so forth. And that's where I think we all have to be alert in terms of what information is being, well, put out there.
yeah. And so what the net is um, that it can fool you.
Yes.
And this can fool you because it looks good, it sounds good, it on the surface. And you can do incredible things that are really valuable, that no understanding this, I think, is really valuable for us as people that are trying to lead the future of this country, in our own ways, however much our contribution is. Um, this subject is important and it's going to be hard to find, but we don't see anybody that's doing this well, right?
Right.
So this is why we're doing it, because it doesn't have what you and I would call an intuitive answer. So we're not
Right.
starting at this with an intuitive answer, trying to get it to match. We're trying to understand it. But again, in all these things, this sounds right: executive summary and introduction, overview, analysis, Doge, economic implications, structural challenges, conclusion references. It all sounds good from a structure point of view. Where it's going to have weaknesses as you start down reading through this. And usually the exec summary is where you'll start to feel that this doesn't feel quite right to me. Something is missing, or it's talking about something I don't want it to be talking about. I want it to emphasize something else. Um, and then this will very quickly tell you whether this is headed in the way you want it to head. Now, what are we doing this for? What you're doing is you're looking to create work that is what you and I call believable,
Right.
right? Because you and I wouldn't be doing it if we didn't want something that was real, right? And that's something we could then take and influence our own business and our own,
Right.
what we do.
Right.
And it's it we try to stay on the front edge of everything that is happening that's big that affects people building businesses. That's what we're trying to do, especially when it's technology oriented. And so we're going to be extra sensitive to this point about, let's make sure that we as people that are building things at a high level, so founders, CEOs, people that are in the C-suite with strategic and powerful operational jobs, that we all are using these things. Because if you're not using these things, there's a huge capability that your competitors either are or will be. We know that because we have people that are asking us to help and that are actually, I mean, I had a tech CEO say to me in the neighborhood the other day that I didn't even knew that I did this stuff, that they were watching our videos, right? By the way, I meant to tell you, dear, she went to Stanford.
She
Uh,
did.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
she's an engineer from Stanford. She was
Mhm.
very excited to hear that you are from Stanford because she likes you.
Yes.
Not that we all don't love you, Deirdre. It's just, I
That's
get
wonderful
more compliments
connection
about
here.
you than
Yeah.
I do about me. I'll tell you that. They don't compliment me very well, which is fine. This isn't about me. It's about what we're doing. But I laugh every time. I said, so what about me? Well, I like you too, but I really like Deirdre. Hilarious. Um, but what we're trying to do is to say, look, your competitors will be using this at some point if they're not already. So just in self-defense, you need to be learning to use this and it also helps you enormously in figuring out how do you use this in scale in your organization. You won't have them doing this kind of thing, but at least you'll understand the power of these different models that are available to you, the reasoning model, or the thinking type models, and then the LLMs that are hugely productive and that synthesize information really well and can, if they, but again, everything has to match this validity, believability model, and to be valuable, no matter where that use case sits. So, Deirdre, I want to stop. We've been at this for over an hour, and and
Just a quick point at the end. This is our fourth video on this topic. We've
yes,
already planned out our fifth video. We will clearly have a sixth and seventh. I think the very fact that we've had to do so many videos, not had to do, we've enjoyed doing so many
yes,
videos, starts to talk to the complexity and the importance of this whole issue. That this is not simply like using a simple little program to run create an Excel analysis and something. These are deep, powerful tools that everyone is going to have to learn to use simply to make sure that your entity is operating at the level, at least of your competitors, or we hope ahead of your competitors here. So we're going to keep talking about these issues just to help you figure out not just the mechanics of doing this, but understand the psychology of doing it and understand how to analyze and use the output from these models.
yes. Those for those of you that stay up on this, and I know that most tech people like Deirdre and me are. We watch or follow the All In podcast with the tech, the folks, the high level tech influencers in our business. They covered this in a, I think I told you, Deirdre, it was this past week, I think, that they
Right.
covered this subject. And we mentioned this to to our Voyager members. They covered this subject, but they covered it from the point of view of how important this was from a what you can do with it. So they focus more on the what. Um,
Yes.
again, that it needs to be led by the C-level person running the company. They didn't get into the how you use it like we do, where we step you through how to use this. But one of the visiting CEOs was there saying, "Yeah, I use this," and you could tell he uses it the way you and I use it, Deirdre. So this is an important subject, and we hope you find it as easy to use as we do and as hard to use as we do because the judgment and the knowledge and the experience are the real key here. But Deirdre, as usual, it's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Tom. So long.
Bye.